So yes, Battlefield 2042 has become better to play since it launched. It's an undeniable truth. Mind you, the bar wasn't really that high from the launch, but things have gotten better. However, we are still far from that golden standard that Battlefield should be held to as far as the core gameplay is concerned, and that's something I want to talk about. G'day there once again viewers, your mate Kamikaze78 here, and today we're going to talk about the biggest issues that Battlefield 2042 still faces to this day. Now obviously, when you're looking for Battlefield 2042's biggest problems, the answer you're going to get is going to vary between person to person, and it also depends on the context in which you are focusing on. About a month ago, I posited in a video that one of Battlefield 2042's biggest problems is that it continues to feel soulless, right? Its decision to quote-unquote name soldiers and turn them into specialists creates this lacking sense of feeling like a Battlefield game when compared against the gritty, cog in the larger machine experience that you got from titles like Battlefields 3, 4, and 1, for example. However, let's just for argument's sake assume that that wasn't a problem and the game took on an artistic choice of only using classes in generic uniforms, for example. There's still a lot of underlying issues with Battlefield 2042's gameplay that puts it well below par for what we should be expecting from this franchise. And for me, the core issue actually dials down to every element of the gameplay. That being just the general simplification, or dumbing down, for lack of a better term, of the gameplay of Battlefield. It sort of follows the mantra of, if everyone is overpowered, then no one is. Now, look, I get it, that's going to sound incredibly vague, but do bear with me as we work through the thought process here today. The general overview is that Battlefield 2042 takes the Battlefield formula of large-scale battles on large-scale maps with teamwork winning the day, only to really strip back the depth and dumb down the whole experience and the mechanics that once made up a Battlefield game and the Battlefield experience. Now, sometimes this stems from a core design problem, and at other times it comes from a balance problem in the game. To point the spotlight first on a more of a core balance problem, we have to look at the gunplay of Battlefield 2042. The laser beamy, no recoil gunplay. Recently, I went back to play some Battlefield Bad Company 2 for a laugh and to farewell the game, noting its upcoming shutdown. But what struck me most profoundly about that game was just how much effort was required to handle the gunplay there in that game. The cone of fire bloom was actually present there, and bursting was a necessity to score kills at any range beyond, I would say, 20, maybe 30 meters, depending on the weapon I was using. But you look at Battlefield 2042's gunplay, and you'll see clips of assault rifles just laser beaming people with sniper rifles about 150 meters away in a single full auto burst. Even the LMGs in this game are capable of such shenanigans, and are at times often regarded as just assault rifles with bigger magazines. It's crazy stuff. The gunplay in this game is often regarded as being more in line or more in tune with a Call of Duty experience over a Battlefield experience. And it's really a byproduct of the game just feeling like it has any lack of depth to its gunplay. And just to be abundantly clear here, I have no problem in rewarding highly skilled players who can pull off those kinds of longer range kills with some solid weapon recoil and cone of fire management skills. Previous Battlefield games often sported incredible gunplay mechanics that had a wide range of weapons that all felt different yet suitable in their own ways, and if you were skilled enough you could push said weapon to the next level. But in this game, every weapon really feels like a point and shoot, score kill, repeat sort of scenario. There's no sense of depth to managing the cone of fire bloom or the recoil. It again kind of feels like the game's gunplay aims to take on board that approach of, if everything's overpowered, nothing is. But the problem with that is that you inadvertently create a game where the thing you do most in a first-person shooter game, that is interact with the gunplay, feels boring and shallow to use. Now, that feeling of the game being dumbed down can also be seen in how vehicles behave in the game, particularly the bloody transport vehicles. Now, I don't know whose idea it was at DICE to give the big bulky, tanky transport helicopters the ability to mount explosive, AoE damage-based weaponry. But I really want to sit them down in a room and just, calmly ask them some questions about what the hell they were thinking, To this day, these helicopters have been the biggest pain in my ass whenever I play this game. And if you have a Super Hind or a Condor on the enemy team with a full crew also repairing the vehicle from within, just forget about it. The game's over, don't even bother. Now, yes, this kind of gameplay with transport helicopters has been a thing in Battlefield for the longest time. I still remember running a sick transport helicopter squad in Battlefield 3 and dominating the game with the Huey, for example. But the difference there is that the only armament that transport helicopter had was the side-mounted miniguns that required you to directly hit targets to score a kill. There was none of this, carpet bombing an entire capture point with 40mm grenades while taking 3 direct hits from M5 recoilless rockets and surviving business. It changes the entire dynamic of these vehicles and turns them into these offensive monsters as opposed to having the main goal of, transporting the team around. If you wanted to do good work in a transport vehicle offensively in older Battlefield games, it required clear communication, good teamwork, and above all else, precise shooting from the gunners. And as a result, if you wanted to pull off these, effective offensive transport vehicle runs, there was additional risk there present because it was harder to achieve. And in fact, the more I think about it, this sort of stuff applies to a lot of the transport vehicles in the game. The Jeeps, the hovercrafts, the Bolts, all having, 30mm, 40mm, sometimes 50mm cannons on them, or launchers for that matter, have continued to be one of this game's biggest pain points from a balance perspective for many players. I'm sure we all remember the days of the launch of the game when the hovercrafts were just careening around maps with the 40mm grenade launchers on them and scaling buildings to get up there and cause more havoc. Or what about the 30mm cannons on the Bolts when they used to be an absolute farming machine once upon a time? There is simply no need for every vehicle in this game to be this source of absolute death and destruction. Very rarely in previous Battlefield games have the transport vehicles had more than a heavy machine gun for a defensive armament. And yes, there have been exceptions like the Amtrak from Battlefield 3, but that vehicle had one gunner with a 40mm grenade launcher, and it was slow as shit. It was easy to take out if you had enough people with engineer classes pointing their launchers at it. But for some reason now in this game, we're giving these transport vehicles the means to completely suppress entire choke points or capture points with ease from a significant distance, while also giving them good mobility, or in some cases, also beefy HP pools. There is just no need to make every single element of your game, in this case the transport vehicles, feel this overpowered. It just doesn't make any sense. And moving beyond the vehicle design of the game as well, the game tends to feel incredibly linear and simplified when you look at some of the map design decisions and the gear that's been added to the game to interact with those map design decisions. There's a lot of objectives in this game, especially in the breakthrough game mode, that funnel these decent-sized teams into 1 or 2 choke points with very little flanking routes on offer. And we all know what happens then. It becomes this battle of attrition between endless explosive spam and Irish APS deployables to see who sneaks the hits through first. And as we all know, there's nothing more riveting than staring at a doorway, jamming as much explosives through it as possible, basically playing the game like a Boris turret, only using one hand to play the game and your other to do other activities. Anyway, the amount of gear that allows this to happen across multiple specialists or classes just doesn't help at all. You've got Zane's airburst launcher, Sundance's scatter grenades, the SPH sticky grenade launcher, the underbarrel launchers available on a lot of weapons. There's just this overabundance of spammy ranged explosive weapons that, in aggregate, completely break the flow of gameplay in a lot of maps and devolves the entire gameplay flow into let's lift click on a door. It just doesn't hold a candle to the quality of Battlefield gameplay that I've seen on offer previously. I remember Battlefield Bad Company 2's and Battlefield 3's rush modes, once upon a time. There was always ample opportunity to approach an objective in a new way, and the maps didn't resort to the kind of experience that we see oh so often in this game. Games would often feel dynamic and like there was always room for counterplay. That just doesn't feel like it's the case here anymore, unfortunately, especially on maps like Exposure and how it handles breakthrough. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. I mean, hell, even ignoring the infantry-based explosive spam for a little minute here, we have the Pocket TV missile launcher available to Liz nowadays. The kind of weapon that only used to exist on vehicles in a limited capacity or on deployed weapons around the map. you know, if you didn't find one of those, or if you weren't in a vehicle, you had an unguided launcher or a lock-on launcher. None of this TV missile guided business. You know, giving these kinds of tools that were once designed from a balance perspective to be limited in availability to everyone who opts to play a certain character completely alters the interaction that exists between vehicles and infantry due to a lack of restraint in the game design. Yeah, that's the word, restraint. And it really dumbs down that vehicle versus infantry gameplay loop. And I think what all of this represents that we've discussed today, and to quote Jurassic Park for a second here, is DICE sort of always asking whether or not they could, but never stopping to ask whether or not they should. All of these design and balance decisions that we've talked about in today's video really shows that DICE just wanted to add more for the sake of adding more. As we all know, sometimes less is more, and I feel as though a lack of restraint from DICE in some of these decisions and in balancing a lot of how these interactions occur in this game, whether it be at the core gunplay level or the infantry versus infantry explosive level or whatever have you, it just creates a really shallow experience. And unfortunately, if the support of the game so far is anything to go by, I think that design direction is here to stick, especially considering we only just saw the addition of the SPH grenade launcher, and it's been very mildly balanced since it came out. If anything, I think this demonstrates a lacking awareness of self-moderation in the design and balance department over at DICE. I get the sense that the DICE team are just going to continue adding more and more gear that sort of tests the waters as to what feels too powerful for the Battlefield gameplay loop. I think, unfortunately, we've crossed that barrier since the game's launch, but DICE seems to be committed to just adding more and more cool stuff for the sake of doing so. And unfortunately, I feel like that's hurting the gameplay experience of Battlefield 2042, so far so to the point where we may even be at a point of no return here. And well, I'm hoping that the next Battlefield game will show some more restraint in what kind of innovations they decide to make when it comes to, you know, giving gear to certain vehicles or the gunplay or whatever the case may be. But anyway, folks, I hope you're able to follow along with my train of thought there. I must be honest, today's video was a little bit more ranty from me, but I hope it still got the point across, and I hope you're still able to enjoy the video. If you were, be sure to backhand the like button and leave a comment down below on your thoughts about Battlefield 2042's problems. Do you agree with my analysis? Do you think I'm completely off the mark? Let me know down below, guys. It does go a long way. Should you want to, you know, keep up with future content as well, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all future video releases and streams that we do right here on YouTube. Once again, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. Peace out, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Take care, guys. Have a good one.